Well, hello. We're starting a little bit early tonight. I promised those who join early that we'll have a little extra content. And I've been trying to do every week, I've been trying to do something about how to teach lessons. And I recently blogged on this, going to be doing some more blogging on this on the Outlook magazine, our union paper. We have a blog, have a good website with a lot of bloggers. I recommend it. And several of us are blogging about Sabbath school lessons right now. And anyway, one of the first things that I talk about is it's going to be kind of odd because of the situation we have here. But don't lecture unless you have to. There aren't very many good lecturers in the world, and most of us don't like being lectured to. And so this is one of the big faults that we see in many Sabbath school classes and Bible classes in general, that one person does all the talking. And you'll notice even here, I try to encourage interaction. And in fact, everything else being equal, this Sunday evening at 7, I hope to do the Zoom where people can actually interact. And I'll be doing more about that this week and putting it on my Facebook page about you get a Zoom account, it's free. And again, probably next Sunday evening or somewhere around there, 7 p.m., that's my plan. I'll do at least an original or inaugural, shall we say, Zoom, where we have the chance for more interaction. Because, again, most of you will not be in a position to be lecturing. You shouldn't be lecturing class. I always say that Christianity is not a lecture class. It's a lab class. And if you really want, people will remember what they find for themselves. And that's why one of the things I'm always doing here is emphasizing and giving you tools to dig for yourself, rather than simply, take what I say as gospel, because I'm not inspired, and I'm not in any doubt about that. Sometimes I get the feeling when people are lecturing and preaching that they aren't sure that there's a difference between their word and the word of God. Anyway, I have no illusions about that. But that's the first guideline for good teaching is don't just lecture unless you can be a situation. I've spoken to auditoriums of 1,000 people. It's very difficult to do a lot of interaction there. But that is a key, especially in this postmodern environment. People want interactivity. They're used to it. They're accustomed to it. And frankly, as a teacher, it's one of the best ways to find out whether your audience is tracking, whether you're actually communicating what you want to. So that's my tip for this week. I'm going to have a lot more on how to teach the lesson. And again, more of this will come as I model the process in these Zoom sessions. I'm trying to do 2 or 3 that will be sort of figuring out how everything works. And then eventually I want to make it a regular feature, but we'll get into that later. All right, it is time, finally. Like I say, I want to give a little extra to those who join early. You came early, you have a reason to have something good. All right, so it is time now to begin with the main part. It's by my clocks, it says it's time to start, so I'm going to. I'm going to start, as I always do, with a word of prayer. Lord, this week, the title of the lesson is Satan and His Allies. And we know that this information is important to us because you've gone to great lengths to put it in your word and to give us the opportunity to receive it. But Lord, let us never be so focused on Satan and his allies that we lose sight of the fact that this book is the revelation of Jesus Christ, that it is the Lamb who drives the action, it is the Lamb who is most important to us. And help us to keep our attention focused on Him. Aware, yes, of the adversary, but our attention focused, as the saints in Revelation always are, on the Lamb. We ask all this in the name of that Lamb, Jesus Christ. Amen. Well, I'm here to tell you that I feel much better than I did a week ago at this time. You don't want to know the details. I'm getting of such an age, it seems like we talk more and more about our ailments. But anyway, I'm feeling really good. If you haven't followed the news wherever you are, we are under a huge blanket of snow. I've lived in this house now for almost 38 years, and this is unprecedented, the amount of snow that we've had. And we live on a hilltop in the country, which means that when the snow comes and the wind blows, we get snowed in. We get serious, serious drifts. And I want to give a shout out to my grandchildren, 3 of my grandchildren who came over and shoveled us out today. Literally couldn't get out from the house to the car. Anyway, ready for excitement. I hope the weather's better where you are. Hope and we will rejoice in it wherever we are. For that, as Thessalonians tells us, is the will of God concerning us, that we give thanks in everything. Now, you'll notice that our lesson this week is primarily Revelation 13. If you'll read for this week's study, Revelation 13. But the memory text is from Revelation 12:17. Then the dragon was angry with the woman, and he went to wage war with the remnant of her offspring, who keep commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. So, why, if the lesson is primarily about Revelation 13, does the memory text come from Revelation 12? And it's the same kind of thing that I've been talking about over and over again. Okay, someone from Manaus, Brazil. Well, I'm afraid I don't know any Portuguese. The only closest I can come would be bienvenidos. Anyway, welcome. I'm sure it's got to be warmer there than it is here. And I see my friend from Australia is here too. So it's deep summer there, and I understand they've been having some heat waves. Anyway, weather's what you get. Climate's what you expect, but weather's what you get. And as I said, we can all rejoice. So why, again, is this memory text from Revelation 12? And the answer that I'm going to supply, okay. Thank you. Now I may have one word of Portuguese. The reason that the memory text comes from Revelation 12 is for the same reason that I've been talking about, I think, virtually every week, and that is Revelation is a narrative. There is a story. It's an unusual story. It has some very strange characters in it, but it is a continuous story. Yes, hello, thank you from Australia. I can't tell you how much I love Australia and would love to visit there again. Show my wife around. And like I say, as I understand, it's been quite a summer there, quite hot. Anyway, moving on. There is a revelation, there is a narrative in Revelation, and the events in 13 are not isolated from the events in 12. And so, just to review very quickly, in Revelation 12, we saw these 2 great wonders: the woman with the clothes with the sun, the 12 stars in her crown, her feet on the moon, and she's about to give birth to a child. Then we see another great wonder, which is this dragon, and there's war in heaven. And anyway, the dragon waits. He wants to devour the man-child, which the woman is about ready to deliver, but he can't because the man-child is taken up into heaven. And then he pursues the woman. She's given 2 wings of an eagle to go into the desert. He spews water out of his mouth to catch up to her, but the earth drinks up the water. In other words, he's frustrated. He has failed in his war in heaven. There is no place found for him there. He has failed in his desire to eat the man-child. He has failed in his pursuit of the woman. He is furious, and he realizes that he's going to keep failing unless he does something about it. Yes, I saw some of the video of those floods. Amazing, astonishing. So that's what this is all about. In Revelation 12, the dragon, Satan, serpent, John leaves us in no doubt about who this is furious. He's frustrated. He knows his time is short, it says. And so he is doing everything he can to make war with Michael. He can't reach him in heaven. He can't reach the man-child. He can't reach the woman. And so he's going to have to do something different. And in that context, we have Revelation 13. Remember, the Revelation, the chapters in the Bible were added more than 1,000 years after they were all written. So they're handy for finding things, but they have little relationship to the flow of the book. So, and we put this at the end of last week, and the dragon stood on the sand of the seashore. That was the last thing we saw. He had pursued the woman to the desert, and he goes to the beach. And we pick him up this week on the beach. And, sorry, I should have had this queued up at the top. Get this all the way to the top. So here it is. And the dragon stood on the sand of the seashore. Now remember, he's going to say, then I saw. He's going to see and hear again. These things are combining to give us more information, to give us more rounded and three-dimensional, if you will, information about the visions he's having. Then I saw a beast coming up out of the sea. A beast having 10 horns and 7 heads. Okay, this is really strange to start with. A 10-headed beast. A 10-horned beast with 7 heads, so apparently there's more than one horn in at least one of the heads. And on his horns were 10 diadems. We've talked about this repeatedly. In the book of Revelation, the Stephanos, the crown of victory, is the one that the redeemed wear. I'm not sure what you mean by not having dragon seeing. Anyway, I'll do the best I can with that. 10 diadems. And on his heads were blasphemous names. So he has 10 diadems. The diadems are the crowns of rulership. This is not a victorious beast. This is a power beast. That is his modus operandi. That is what he's concerned about. That is his tool. He uses power. And I can say this. Coercion is always a tool of the dragon, a tool of the devil, whoever's wielding it. All right. On his head were 10 diadems, and on his heads were blasphemous names. So we know something about it. This is a ruler, and each of his heads has blasphemous names on it. Now the beast which I saw was like a leopard, and his feet were like those of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. And there it is. There it is. This very strange, I call him the polyglot beast. A leopard, a bear, a lion, 7 heads, 10 horns. Do we have any idea where this all began? Where this all came from? What this is all about? Well, let me share something with you. I'm going to get myself out of the way and the quarterly out of the way. I'm going to pull something else up here. This beast, which comes up out of the sea in Revelation 13, is a combination of all the beasts in the vision in Daniel 7. Let's go through this. In Daniel 7, I'm not going to quote the chapter, but you can go see it, and I'm going to quote verses of it. The first beast we see is a lion in Daniel 7. That's the first beast. Let's see if I can sneak in here and not obscure too much. Okay, for a while I may have to hide again. Okay, so you see there's a lion. That's the first beast we see in Daniel 7 is a lion. And of course the lion has how many heads? There's 1. And how many horns does the lion have? None. No big deal. But he is the mouth of the Revelation 13 sea beast. His mouth like a lion. In Daniel 7, the bear is the second beast that we see. He has one head and no horns, and he is the feet of the Revelation 13 sea beast. Let me duck out of the way. All right. Finally, or not, well, getting there. We're not finally yet. The leopard in Daniel 7, but the leopard in Daniel 7 has 4 heads, and this is because it is a prophecy of Alexander's kingdom, which Alexander died very young, and he divided his empire to 4 of his generals. This is quite commonly known. So the leopard in Daniel 7 has 4 heads to represent these 4 generals. But so far, we still have a dearth of horns, no horns. And in Revelation 13, this is the body. He looks like a leopard. The beast looks like a leopard, but he has mouth like a lion and feet like a bear. But there's one more beast. One more beast in Daniel 7, and that is the great and terrible beast. He might look like a dragon, but he doesn't look like anything else. He's the terrifying beast that we have in Daniel 7. And he has only one head, but he has 10 horns. All right. So if we look at this beast, the lion, the bear, and the leopard, which are all parts of the Revelation 13 beast over here. And then this beast in Revelation 13 has how many heads? 7 heads, which is all the heads of all of these beasts in Daniel 7. And he has 10 horns, which is the sum of the horns of the beasts in Daniel 7. So I suggest to you that what John is trying to tell us here is that this beast in Revelation 13 is the culmination, the combination of all of these beastly powers, all of these empires. It is all of their characteristics compiled into one beast. And this is the first beast that arises in Revelation 13. But the thing is, if you remember, the dragon that called him also had 7 heads and 10 horns. And the dragon gave him his power and his throne and his great authority. I saw one of the heads as if it had been slain, and his fatal wound, was healed. Okay, friends, there's a problem with this. When someone has a fatal injury, that means they die. We don't recover from fatal injuries. If it's a fatal injury, we die. So the fact that he was healed is an indication of a resurrection. This creature, this dragon, has one of the characteristics of a false Christ. He is the false resurrection. Looking at which one of the heads was wounded and healed and all that is really secondary. The main thing is that this is a counterfeit of Christ, and we should expect that it will try to behave in that way. And of course, if you have a fatal wound to the head and then you recover, it's pretty amazing. And the whole earth was amazed and followed after the beast. They worshiped the dragon because he gave his authority to the beast. Now, notice what happens here. They worship the dragon. That's the one from Revelation 12, because he gave his authority to the beast. This is all of this chapter, Revelation 13, is demonstrating Satan is losing, the dragon is losing, and so what he does, rather than just try to keep doing what he was doing before, he calls up reinforcements, and he's creating a false trinity, a counterfeit trinity, because when Jesus came to earth, he wanted everyone to worship the Father They worshiped the Father because of what Jesus was doing. And here, we have the same thing happening. The world worships the dragon because of what the beast does. Yeah, exactly. He's the combination of all the global power beasts. That's a good description. He's this combination of all of those powerful forces that have appeared throughout history. But he's not done. If you're going to have a false trinity, you need a third person. So you have the beast, and now you have the dragon. You have the beast that's going to be called out of the sea. And they worship the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast, and who is able to wage war with him?" All right. So this is what they've been doing, and you'll see this again and again. This is something I mentioned basically in my prayer, and that is that it's easy to get fixated upon what the beast is doing. It's easy to get fixated on the false trinity, and that's what happens here. In fact, when you see this again and again, who is saying who is like the beast? It's going to turn out it's the people who have the mark on their forehead and the mark on their hand. The people who follow the Lamb are not saying who is like the beast. They don't care about the beast. They're saying who is like the Lamb. Their focus is repeatedly on the Lamb. In fact, I had this in an article review some years ago. So here you have the Son, the fake Son, this resurrected, the fake resurrection, the counterfeit resurrection, the counterfeit Son, and he gives glory to his Father as Christ gave glory to his Father. Okay, so he gives glory. They worship the dragon because of what the beast does. Yep. If you see it up there in the corner of the screen there, that's what I've titled this whole block diagram, the false trinity, because he's trying to mimic and battle against the true trinity. And here's the point. And I'm going to say this right now because the point of all of this in Revelation 13 is not those who have the mark of the beast. They're not the target here. He's already got them. The whole purpose of this counterfeit trinity and all of the things that happen here, the purpose of this is to deceive the followers of the Lamb. That's who he wants. He wants worship from them. He wants to steal them from the Lamb. Okay? And he goes about it in various, he goes about it the way he can go about it. And here it is. There was given him a mouth speaking arrogant words and blasphemies, and authority to act for, here it comes, 42 months. Okay? How long was Christ's ministry on the earth? 3.5 years, 42 months. This is a false Christ figure. And yes, understand that at this point in the Bible, ordinarily, when I get to teach more than when I teach the book of Revelation, I don't just start with chapter 1. I start with the Old Testament, so you can see that by this time, these layers are quite deep because Christ's ministry is based somewhat on Elijah's ministry, which is also 3.5 years. There's 3.5 years of drought during Elijah's ministry. So this is the same kind of thing that's happening here. There was given him a mouth speaking arrogant words and blasphemies, and authority to act for 42 months was given him. So, and I've set this out this way because this is a chiasm. This is a very common figure of speech in both Greek and Hebrew in the ancient world and other languages as well, where you have A and A prime, B and B prime. So A and A prime was given to him, and the point of a chiasm is always what's in the middle, the mirror. And so this is the point. He has a mouth speaking errant words and an authority to act. And he did what he does, what he knows how to do. He opened his mouth in blasphemies of God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle, that is, those who dwell in heaven. Now, what does that mean? What does he mean? Why would he blaspheme his tabernacle? Well, we talked about this in other lesson studies where one of the key prophecies in the Old Testament is about the cleansing of the sanctuary. And the 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. And I can't repeat all that right here, but it is important to understand. We have focused on one or two altars as though that was the most important point. I think my position is that the whole sanctuary encampment, the whole thing, is what is being blasphemed right here. It is being called into question, and that what is being happened is not the sanctuary is being cleansed, but the plan of salvation, which is outlined in the sanctuary service, is being called into question, is being blasphemed. And so when that is cleansed, it is vindicated. That's another word, the Hebrew word tzedek, which is translated cleansed in Daniel 8, can also be vindicated. And that's what's happening. God's character and his plan of salvation is being vindicated. And of course, that's exactly what Satan wants to do. What Lucifer's doing is the exact opposite. Yes, and he's after that. He wants to defame God's plan of salvation. We see this today. I think it's Sam Harris who says, when a natural disaster happens, you have three choices. Either God is powerless, or he doesn't care, or he's worthless because he lets these terrible things happen. That is defaming God and his plan of salvation, because it overlooks the fact that only free beings can love. And that's an extremely important thing to God, is that he wants love, voluntary. It cannot be coerced. And Satan can't do anything else. He lies and he tries to force. And so he opened his mouth in blasphemies against God to blaspheme his name, which is, I'm going to say this now, the name in the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, but here in Revelation, the Old Testament is relevant, is character. There are many obvious examples in the Old Testament. The most obvious is when Jacob wrestles with the angel and becomes Israel, the one who wrestles with God. So, that's what he's doing. He is blaspheming, he is discrediting, he is defaming God's plan of salvation and all those who are involved in it, those who dwell in heaven. Okay. Now, we said this. In Revelation 12, again, we cannot forget that 12 is the setup for 13. Revelation 12, he makes war with Michael. And then he tries to devour the man-child, which is Christ. And then he makes war with the woman, but he can't catch her. And so he's gone to make war with the remnant of her offspring. And here it is. It was given to him authority to act for 42 months, and he does all this blasphemy. It was also given to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. Now, this does not mean that he can get at their salvation. It does mean he can kill them physically. Okay? That's what's happening here. And it has happened in our history. It was given him to make war with the saints and overcome them, and authority over every tribe, people, tongue, and nation was given to him. I also did this same color scheme. This is another chiasm. You have given to him in both the beginning and the end. And what's given him is to make war, to overcome, and authority. So for a time, after he pursues the woman into the wilderness, and for a time before Christ eventually returns, it is going to look like the dragon is winning. It's going to look like the dragon is in fact God. That's why this counterfeit trinities. He's mimicking God. He wants everyone to think he is God so that he can receive worship. We begin to see why one of the metaphors in the Old Testament for apostasy is seduction. He wants to seduce us away. Yes, I think that's quite right. And in fact, it has to do with legalism, with salvation by works, that we don't need God. That is the ultimate blasphemy, is that we can be holy, we can be good without God. And that's just simply false. It's worse than a pipe dream. So for a time, he's given authority and power to make war and to overcome. all who dwell on the earth will worship him. Now understand, this is not including the saints, because those who dwell on the earth in Revelation, especially this part of Revelation, are those who are at the dragon's mercy. They are the ones who have the mark of the beast and so forth. That's why we have to be careful about saying, for example, the text that says, they that destroy the earth, God will destroy them that destroy the earth. Not talking about ecology there. I'm not saying that's not an important factor. It just isn't what Revelation is talking about. All who dwell on the earth will worship him, and everyone whose name has not been written from the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb, who has been slain. Notice that, written from the foundation of the world. We're going to get this an interesting idea. In the book of life. But notice, who is it now? And I just mentioned this. Those who dwell on the earth, and I put this in red and bolded it because that phrase will be repeated again and again throughout this chapter. Notice that they are not the same. This is everyone whose name has not been written in the book for the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who was slain. So you are one of these two groups. If you're one of the ones who dwell on the earth, you're then those who, not those whose name is written here. Even though he has power, it was given to him, because he doesn't have any power of his own. It's important to understand that. It was given to him to make war with the saints and overcome them. Now, why was it given to him? Well, that's really the issue of the great controversy, that in order for beings to freely assent to God's rulership, they have to see. There's no other way. Surely there would, if there was, God would find it. They have to see that Satan's way is only destructive and only God's way leads to happiness. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. Now remember, this sounds a little bit like the message to the churches. If anyone is destined for captivity, to captivity he goes. And anyway, if anyone kills with the sword, he must be killed. And other of these sort of chiastic things. Here is the perseverance and the faith of the saints. Okay, this is the patience of the saints. You're going to hear this again in chapter 14. It means endurance. How do we endure? How do we, who are written in the name of the book, in the Lamb's book of life, we are not those who worship the beast, but when he has power to wage war on us and to overcome us, and when evil seems to rule, as it often does in human history, this has happened over and over again. The periods we forget, we read the Bible history, and we see these great periods of reform, but there were 400 years of judges when everyone did what was right in their own mind. There were 400 years of slavery before that. There were 400 years of kings, the 400 years of darkness. These are approximate times, obviously, but roughly 400 years. And, a lot of people lived in the middle of those 400 years. It was 200 years since the last good thing had happened. It was 200 years, but they have no way of knowing before the next deliverance would come. How do we live in this messy middle, I call it, where it appears for generations past, only evil has been happening. Evil has ruled, and it appears for generations in the future, evil will rule. That is the point here. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. If they're destined to go to captivity, they will go. If they kill with the sword, they will be killed with the sword. Just because these things happen, there are consequences to our actions. And some of us will spend a very long time. Sorry about that. It's very annoying. Some of us will spend. It's something that's happened again and again in history. Some of us will spend a very long time under oppression, and that is the way it is. I'm not saying we should be supine. I'm saying recognize it. It's going to happen. That is the norm in history. So we endure through this by recognizing that God is there and that there are consequences to these bad actions. Psalm 37 comes into play here. Moving on. Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spoke as a dragon. Now here we are again. What you see and what you hear. You see that he has lamb-like horns. But you hear the voice of the dragon. In other words, this is a deceptive beast. He wants you to think he is lamb-like. Every other time in the book of Revelation where the word lamb occurs in Greek or in English, it refers to Christ every other time. So what it tells you is that this beast is going to look like a lamb. But when he opens his mouth, he's going to sound like a dragon. And he exercises all of the authority of the first beast in his presence. And he makes the earth and those who dwell of it to worship the first beast, whose fatal wound was healed. This is, if you will, the counterfeit Holy Spirit, because the Holy Spirit leads us into all truth. Jesus left the Comforter, the Holy Spirit, who does not seek to draw worship to himself, but to Christ. And so, same thing happens here. This second beast tries to cause everyone to worship the first beast, just as the first beast brought glory to his father, the dragon. Okay. Really important stuff here. He makes the earth and those who dwell on it worship the first beast, whose fatal wound was healed, the counterfeit resurrection. He performs great signs, so that he makes fire come down out of heaven to earth in the presence of men. Now this is a direct reference to the prophet Elijah. Prophet Elijah brought fire from heaven at least 3 times, maybe 4. We know about Mount Carmel, but there are also the time he's being pursued by Ahab's soldiers, and he brought down fire from heaven and consumed them. So this is an Elijah, a prophetic figure. That's why they often call him the false prophet. But he's also the Holy Spirit figure. He's going to do spiritual things. He's going to do amazing things. He makes fire come down out of heaven to the earth in the presence of men. And he deceives those who dwell on the earth. Remember, with those who dwell on the earth, what's the difference? Those who dwell on the earth are one group, and they are contrasted with those. Oh, wow. Now if you're not dizzy, I am. There it is. Earlier, those who dwell on the earth were contrasted from those whose names were written from the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who has been slain. So these are the ones who are Satan's prey. These are the ones with the mark of the beast, as we'll get there. So, those that dwell on the earth, he deceives those who dwell on the earth because of the signs which it was given him to perform in the presence of the beast. So, these are people who may be on the outside and perhaps almost certainly think themselves to be godly. But they're confronted with these miraculous signs. They cannot explain them. And so they think it must be the power of God. As my friend says, this describes a situation where you have the Elijah confrontation between good and evil. Let him who is God bring fire down. Only this time, the fire comes down on the wrong altar. The fire comes down on the altar of Satan. And that's why people are deceived. So, because of these signs, these amazing things which appear to be godly, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast. All right. The beast who had the wound of the sword had come to life, the counterfeit resurrection, the counterfeit Christ. And it was given to him to give breath to the image of the beast. Okay? So this image, whatever this image that men build, and I don't know how this is going to work itself out in actuality, but something is then it is going to appear to become alive. Give breath to the image of the beast so that the image would even speak and cause as many as who do not worship the image of the beast to be killed. We talked about this at the beginning of this chapter. He's given diadems. These are crowns of rulership, and he's given authority to make war on the saints and to overcome them. And this is Satan's tool, his coercion, his force. We can recognize it. It doesn't matter who wields it. Force is not God's tool. Cause as many as do not worship the image of the beast to be killed. So this is dramatic. And we have here also a Daniel 3 scene where you have the great image on the plain of Dura, was it? You have the great image on the plain of Nebuchadnezzar, and those who refused to worship it were thrown into the fire. This is the guy who can bring fire from heaven. So you have a Daniel 3 situation again. If you don't worship this beast, you don't worship this image which I brought to life, you're to be killed. And he causes the small and the great, the rich and the poor, free men and slaves, all to be given a mark on their right hand or on their forehead. Now, there are two things about this that are interesting. First of all, in the Old Testament, God tells his people to put his law on their right hand and in their forehead. And of course, this led to the practice of what we call phylacteries today. In some cultures, some Orthodox Jews literally do that. They have the law, the little scroll, on their forehead and in the right hand. But God wasn't talking about that. I mean, he said to do this, but these were symbolic ideas even then, because the mark on the forehead says, this is what I believe. And God wanted his Old Testament people to put the law in their hearts, in their heads. He wanted them to meditate on it day and night, as the psalmist says. He wanted to become a part of them. And that would work itself out then in the deeds that they did, which is what the right hand symbolizes. That was the idea in the Old Testament. But here, we're going to get the same kind of a thing. Only some people will believe it. They'll be taken in and they'll completely believe it. And other people will go along with it. They'll do it with the hand only because they don't want to die. Oh, well, understandable. But that's what's happening. And he provides. Who is this? Second beast, the false prophet. The one that brings fire from heaven. He provides that no one will be able to buy or sell except the one who has the mark, either the name of the beast or the number of the beast, or the number of his name. Now, we talked about this before. The name in Scripture, especially the Old Testament, and very relevant here in Revelation, names are character. Okay? And there's a good deal of that even today. We still have that notion. We try to name our children noble names. But as I said, Jacob is the one who was the supplanter. He had his hand on his brother's heel when he was born. And he becomes the one who wrestles with God. When he wrestled with God, Israel. All right. So that change of character was marked by change of name. So here we have this mark, which is not a visible mark. You see the Universal Product Code or some other silly thing. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the character. And there are people who will have adopted this. They will believe it and they will become fervent. Jesus said in John that the day is coming when people who kill you will think they're doing God's service. Well, we've certainly seen that. So these are the people who have the name of the beast. They have this, his character has become their character. And then the others have the number of his name. That is, they have this mark that says, yeah, I belong to him. It's like a a license plate or something. And again, it's not literally, but that's what this symbolism is talking about here, that people belong to. All right. Here's wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast. So that number is the number of a man, and the number is 666. Wow. Well, you could Google it, and I don't suggest that you do, because there's an awful lot of very strange things out there. Decoding names with the Latin numbers, Latin numerals, and trying to figure out what the number is. My own favorite was the cute purple dinosaur, which comes out to 666. Some people in this country think it was Ronald Wilson Reagan. Had 3 names, and they were all 6 letters long. The best explanation I've seen, again, it's not true, but it's a very kind of an odd one, was a guy online some years ago who said that the 6th letter of the alphabet in the Hebrew alphabet is Vav, which we write as a W, and he's right about that. And the Hebrews did use gematria, it's called. They use numerology. So Aleph, the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, was 1, and Beit was 2, and so forth. And the 6th letter is Vav, W. So he said it's WWW, stay off the internet and save your soul. Of course, this is facetious. Yes, there was a death decree in both cases. That's why it's the Daniel 3 situation. But what is 666? Well, we have said from day one, from the first lesson, that the key to understanding the New Testament, especially understanding Revelation, is the Old Testament. And I like to say that 666 is not an odd number, it's an even one. But you do have to admit it's a very particular number. It's very unusual. It's not like 500 or 1,000 or 25 or some round number. It's very specific, 666. And I would think, wouldn't you, that if that occurred in the Old Testament, that it would be kind of important. Well, there are 2 things. Now, one of the theories that I've seen, and some people, I think this is not untrue, and that is that 666 is a man-made or an imperfect trinity. That makes sense. 777 is the number of perfection, the number of God in the Bible. And the 6th day is the day when man is created, and it's the only thing in creation that is not good. So 666 makes good sense. It fits in with everything else here as a false trinity. But there is a historical reference in the Old Testament, and I saw earlier today, my friend Bronwyn actually alluded to it. And it's interesting. Here is wisdom. Well, who is wisdom in the Old Testament? It's Solomon. And I want to share this with you. Well, it shouldn't be here. 666 occurs in two places in the Old Testament. They're really analogous because one is in Chronicles and one is in Kings. Here we are in 1 Kings 10:13. Excuse me. 10:13. And I want to look. King Solomon gave to the Queen of Sheba all her desire, which she requested. Besides that, he gave her according to his royal bounty. Then she turned and went to her own land together with her servants. So this is the end of the episode of the Queen of Sheba. And the Queen of Sheba came to Solomon because of his wisdom. And now we have this odd thing. Now the weight of gold which came into Solomon in 1 year was 666 talents of gold. And then it goes on with more about the tax revenues. And I mentioned the reference here, 2 Chronicles 9:13. Essentially identical. And it tells about all the marvelous things that he built out of his wealth. Well, this is not a good sign to begin with. Remember when Hezekiah's life was saved and the Babylonian ambassadors came to find out how the sundial had gone backwards, he showed them his wealth. And it was because of that Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonians, targeted the Israelites. So it was a mistake. And in general, when human beings start bragging about their belongings, it's a bad idea. And here's what's going on. We have all these 300 shields of beaten gold, and on and on and on, all the things that he built and how marvelous it was. And then, now King Solomon loved many foreign women, along with the daughter of Pharaoh, Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonian, and Hittite women, from the nations concerning which the Lord had said to the sons of Israel, you shall not associate with them, nor shall they associate with you, for they will surely turn your heart away to their gods. Solomon held fast to these in love. He had 700 wives, princesses, 300 concubines, and his wives turned his heart away. From when Solomon was old, his wives turned his heart away from after other gods, and his heart was not wholly devoted to the Lord his God. So the 666 talents of gold serves as a turning point in the life of Solomon. The turning point from wisdom to apostasy. And we shouldn't be surprised, because again and again in the book of Revelation, what we see is that the greatest opponent of God is not atheism. It is apostate believers. It is apostasy. And that's what's indicated here. Yes, a seal was a symbol of ownership, but it still is. If you incorporate, for example, in my state, you get a piece of paper with the seal on it. Yeah, well, it was 666 talents of gold. He had more than that. In fact, it's kind of humorous here. You see this sort of pride going on here. Let's see this. This is again 1 Kings 10:20. All King Solomon's drinking vessels were of gold, and all the vessels of the house of Forest of Lebanon were pure gold. None was of silver. It was not considered valuable in the days of Solomon. So this is a whole thing that, oh wow, he is so rich and so powerful that silver has no value. And even though it lists the silver, it says it again. Silver was just nothing. All right. And so what we see here is that this is as I said, the turning point from wisdom to apostasy. And that's what I think is the most important thing to understand here, whether it's a false trinity or whatever. You see that apostasy is taking place. It's an apostate power. It's a power that was godly that becomes apostate. Absolutely. And that is the message here. Watch out. Watch out. Now, one more thing, which is something that's a little more subtle, but I really want to go through this because something we may not have noticed when you go through these beasts in Revelation 13. Let's see if I can get this to work now. And that is the beasts in Revelation 13. The beasts in Revelation 13 specifically assault the law of God. They specifically assault several of the commandments. And I'm going to finish with that. I want you to see how this works. Okay, what is the first commandment? No other gods before me. Worship God only. But what happens with the beasts in Revelation 13? The sea beast receives worship in verse 8. And he causes those who refuse to worship to be killed in verse 15. The land beast says that. So there is false worship. Okay, since you asked this question, it just popped up on my screen. I'm going to go to that right now. Vicarious filiae Dei. Here's the problem. One of the rules we have in interpretation is that this has to have meaning for people, for John's audience. his audience is the first century. Now, we go into the derivation of that title and whether it was on a crown or whether it was not on a crown. None of that actually matters, for the simple fact that that title was never used until about the 4th century or the 5th century AD. In other words, it didn't exist when John wrote the book. So it would have had no meaning for his audience. And so it's one of the problems we have when we try to sort of fit things in. I know I learned that myself when I was very young. But there are all kinds of problems with it. But the basic simple one is that John's audience is getting this book because God uses his prophets to communicate to his people so they can know how to have hope. No, it was written for them. That's the other key. It was preserved for us because it has timeless value. This is another thing I've talked about. There's timely truth and there's timeless truth. Lots of things that prophets said in the Old and New Testament, in the history of God's people, have not been recorded. Very few have been recorded. We know the names of the prophets, but we don't know much of what they said. And there were other prophets who were unnamed. We just don't have it. Why? Were they not inspired by God? Yes, they were, but they were telling things. They were exhorting God's people for their time only. It was very specific. It was for their time only. In fact, even with the Apostle Paul, we know that there are letters he wrote that we don't have. We have 1 Corinthians, but he refers in 1 Corinthians to a letter he'd already written them. We don't have that letter. So these things were originally, we have to understand what they meant to the original audience before we can understand what they're supposed to mean for us. That's legitimate scripture. And so these things were written. He says, blessed are those who heed. That was the very first lesson I talked about that in I think it's verse 3 of Revelation 1. Blessed are those who heed what is written in this book. And so it's impossible for people to heed things they can't know. And since it was written, so this was written again 300 or 400 years before that title ever came into existence, it would be impossible for his audience to make anything of it at all. But the idea of apostasy, they could understand. And the idea behind the attaching so much significance to that. Oh, absolutely. It's not just his plan, it's taking place. It is continually being worked out in our own lives. That's what he's trying to, it doesn't take much, you know. I won't get into that too much, but yeah, it's all about apostasy. And even if that title were correct, it would still be about an apostate power, a power which began as an instrument of God and became apostate. So it all works together. I hope that answers your question. If not, we'll do one of the Zoom sessions, which is just the 3 or 4 people who come, and we'll interact on that directly. I'll be glad to do that. I want to finish this though, where we are. Back to the beast in Revelation 13. The first commandment is worship God only. And they violate that by accepting worship and seeking worship and directing worship other than to God. The second commandment is to have no images. And of course, that's violated because the land beast has them make an image to the beast. So he violates that second commandment. The third commandment is to respect God's name. Do not use it in incantations. That's what it really means. Do not take the Lord's name in vain, means vain repetition. And what do? Well, first of all, the dragon himself is on his head, and the sea beast on his heads are blasphemous names, and he speaks blasphemy. So the first 3 commandments, one after another, are being violated, being attacked by this false trinity in Revelation 13. And it's important to understand this is a direct attack on God. One of the things we lose sight of as people, because we kind of tend to be interested in the first table of the 10 Commandments, the ones that deal with God, a relationship to God. What's interesting about this is that when God talks to people in Zechariah, when he talks to the rich young ruler, he almost always talks about the second table. How are you treating the people around you? How do you lie to one another? Do you slander one another? Do you deal falsely? Those are the things that God tells his people. Be careful about that. Rarely does he direct our attention to the other, because he understands that when we talk about salvation as a relationship, it works both ways. You cannot be true to God and false to your fellow man. If you are false with your fellow man, you are going to be true. So, this is unusual because in this case, the false trinity is going directly after the commandments that relate to our relationship to God. Why? Because the false trinity wants what the true trinity has: worship. Worship. And so I leave you with that for this week, because next week will be chapter 14. And chapter 14 is going to use the word worship again and again and again and again. And whereas we've had the battle fought over the first 3 commandments in Revelation 13, Revelation 14, we're going to move to the final battle, and it will be another commandment. Well, I hope that's useful to you. I hope that makes sense to you. This is the point again. I want you to remember these basic things. This is a narrative that is developing. The conflict is developing. And when we keep the narrative in mind, then these things begin to make more sense. We don't just isolate them and chop them up and end up with interpretations that are kind of mishmash. They don't make any sense. We see a developing process taking place here. The second thing, and I do want to emphasize this again, I think is really, we need to understand that we don't get to tell the author of the biblical passage what he means. He gets to tell us. And if he tells us that he expects the people of his own time to understand it, and he also tells us this is an unveiling, an unsealing. Daniel says it's sealed up. But Revelation, the seals were broken. Everything's opened up. That's the purpose of this. And so we need to know, only when we understand what they understood can we understand what it means to us. Yeah, I hope to think it is my plan to do sound hermeneutics, but boy, that's such a mouthful for most people. All right. Next week, we do something else. Okay, so we have the continuing narrative. We have the meaning for the people of the time. And again, look at the Old Testament. The more you understand the Old Testament stories, the more sense Revelation begins to make, because you hear these echoes and you see these references over and over again. We had Daniel 3, we had Elijah, we had all of these things taking place, and these sometimes they're even more subtle, like these first 3 commandments which are being attacked. Next week, oops, got that backwards. Next week we will be moving on to God's everlasting gospel. And that's right. That's what the lesson's about. But don't forget, it is still part of this developing narrative, this story, very odd story, but the story which John is telling us, which explains to his audience and then to us what is there. And I guess that's the final thing I want to leave you with, is that God gives these messages to give us hope. Well, until next week. And I should mention again, I do plan on 7 p.m. Sunday evening, unless my wife, whom I haven't seen for a couple of days, tells me I have something else. I plan on doing a Zoom session then. So if you're interested in that, you can put it down in the comments underneath this, or on the one this time. I sure hope I don't get sick again. And I'm definitely looking at 7 on Sunday for a Zoom interactive. And there'll be, we'll have the first 3 or 4, maybe 5 people. And it'll be free for all. I'll let you ask whatever you want to, and covering the whole quarter. Thank you. May God bless you, and may you find comfort and hope in His Word.